Hello and welcome back to my weird art show and tell corner. This is where I made something weird and I'm gonna show it to you and then I'm gonna tell you about it. And today I definitely made something weird. So I had this idea a couple of weeks ago where I was just thinking about how cool it would be to to make a clock that had eyes on it and a mouth on it and a nose on it, and on all of the different minute, second, and hours hands, the features floated all around and moved on the face. And I just kept coming back to this idea. I'm like, that is so weird, that's so cool. And I was imagining a clock with 100 different minute, second, hours hands just all spinning and spinning and spinning. And I kept thinking about it, and then I would lose it for a little while, and then I'd come back to the idea and be like, no, that's a really cool idea and that's weird and I really want to explore it. And I was drawing pictures of these clocks with all these eyes and thinking about how cool it would look to have the different hands moving everywhere. And finally I was like, you know what? I think maybe this is just an idea that is living in my heart right now and living in my mind, and it's gotta exit my body and it needs to exist so that I don't have to keep obsessing over this idea about a clock with eyes that move. So this is that video. This is what I've done. I made it. I made the thing that I was talking about and thinking about. And it's weird, and I really like how it looks. So when I was thinking about my original idea, I was thinking about just a clock with a bajillion different eyes and mouths and stuff that all rotate around to make a different configuration of faces. And I haven't given up on that idea, but this was sort of my test run, my prototype version of it. And I didn't want to do a whole big face for my test run. I just kind of wanted to get the idea out of my body and onto an object and go from there. So this one, I was thinking about how I wanted to make it and what I wanted it to look like. And I was looking around my house, and I actually have an area where I have a clock, and the clock is fine. It's just a generic looking little clock. It's a nice color, but it's pretty boring as far as a clock goes. But right across from that clock, I have a poster, and it's got a sun and a moon, celestial looking thing. I started thinking about suns and sundials, and I really like the outdoor terracotta suns. And I was like, well, suns are awesome. The sundial and the clock concept kind of works together. I was thinking about how cool it would be to have a sun with a rotating face, and maybe also kind of somehow working sun and moon together, where sometimes it's a sun, sometimes it's a moon. That's an idea for maybe a different clock project, because I skipped that one, but there's more to the clock thing that I'm thinking about. But yeah, I decided to go for the sun and just kind of go for a zany weirdo sun that has a shifting face. So let's talk about what I did, and I decided to share this as a DIY tutorial in case you want to make a weird clock. And the thing that I like the most about this project, of course, is that I made something that I wanted to make, but I feel like this is a project that I made a version of it that spoke to me, but you could absolutely make it any way that you wanted to. I used cardboard, I used paint, and I used some little miscellaneous weird objects that I stuck to my clock. But you could use paper mache, you could use old cracked dishware, I think would be really cool. Or if you had records or CDs, you could make a clock like that. Really the only non-optional part of this project is you do need a clock set. And I just bought a cheap clock repair set, but I think that they have them at different home repair stores, or Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever. I just bought mine online and it was not expensive, but that is, if you want to make a clock, that is an important part of your clock recipe. But everything else, you could kind of just do whatever you wanted to, and that's basically what I did. So the first thing that I did is I just grabbed a bunch of cardboard. I have old cardboard at the house because I like to paint on old cardboard. And it feels really good to take something that might just end up in the trash or the recycling and get to use it and give it a new purpose. And so I always try and keep a little bit on hand if I get a good box, a nice sturdy box. So I grabbed cardboard, and I didn't really worry too much about measuring perfectly. I had an old bucket that had been sitting around, and so I just used the circle of the bucket to measure out the circle of my clock face and cut it roughly. I realized like halfway through cutting this cardboard that I had possibly the worst scissors in the whole world. And so my cutting style was definitely rustic, we can call it. It's a little rough, but that's okay because I actually really like when cardboard based projects or like trash based products sort of show their materials. So I kind of like that my cardboard cuts are like a little bit crustier than maybe, if you'd use like a piece of poster board or something like a little bit more new and neat. So I'm cool with that. But yeah, so I just cut everything out. I cut big triangles and little triangles to do the ray of the sun. And again, I kind of just went by what I thought would look good. I didn't worry too much about like perfection on this. I really just wanted to have this be sort of like a fun little project for me to follow along with. And once I felt like I had cut enough of those pieces, I sort of laid out sort of my general plan, my general idea of how the rays would sit on the sun, and I went from there. So once they were all cut, I grabbed some white acrylic paint. I really thought that I had gesso, and if I had gesso, I would have preferred to use that. I feel like that gives a really nice base to cardboard. I like it when the brown of the cardboard shows through on painting, but if you want like a nice full coverage acrylic on cardboard, I think it's a lot better and a lot easier to start with a white base. And gesso kind of gives like a texture that the acrylic wants to stick to. But I had to use acrylic because that's what I had, and it worked just fine. So if you have acrylic paint and you want to paint on cardboard, just do it. No big deal. And I just covered everything in the white paint. And then I let it dry, as you do with paint. And after it was all fully dry, I just went in and started painting. So I painted the face of my sun like a nice peachy yellow color. And then I started going wild on the rays. And I was gonna originally do just like more like sun colors. So like yellow, orange, pinks, reds, stuff like that. But I started thinking back to what I was talking about with the sun and moon combo and trying to sort of combine the two. And I got really into the idea of having like darker, more like nighttime colors for the rays. So I went for like a nice like blue, purple, lavender kind of color and like a green color, and just sort of went more nocturnal looking on the rays. And again, this is like the theme for this project. I didn't really have like a plan that I set out for. I just was going on vibes. I was going with what felt right in my heart and what looked right when I started painting it. And so I started just with like some little squiggles. I did some dots. I tried to tie the colors into one another. And I actually really like how they turned out. This was not what my original vision was at all, but sometimes you just got to follow where the paintbrush leads you. And that's absolutely what I did. At this point, too, I started thinking about more ideas, like more stuff that you could do. And I almost changed my plan because I started thinking about how cool it would be to have like the clock face be a flower and have like different flower petals. And then you could have, instead of eyes moving around the face, you could have like ladybugs or bumblebees or something. And I don't know, this project, I feel like it did like quench some like creative thirst that I was having with this one idea, but it also gave me like 10 more ideas. So I feel like this is not the last clock in my clock journey. Once I decided that like my clock was pretty good as far as the painting and the design went, I went ahead and cut a little hole in the center of the clock for the clock mechanism to fit through. And I didn't really measure it. I wasn't really thinking that much about it. I kind of probably should have measured it a little bit more, but I kind of picked sort of the center and just stuck it on. I made sure it fit. And then I glued all of the rays onto the clock. And again, I didn't really measure it. I feel like I probably could have and made it look like a little bit more even and like a little bit more concise is not the word, but like evenly spaced, I guess is all it is. But I kind of liked that it turned out a little bit wonky and a little bit more like whimsical looking, especially I feel like suns and moons and celestial stuff. There is like a little bit of like whimsy to it, if you will. And after that, I started drawing and painting the eyes that I wanted to stick on the clock hands to go around and around and around. And I painted on some more details onto the clock face. And I just glued everything on. I glued everything on and I thought it looked really good. I was really happy with that. But then I set it down for a day and came back to it and I was looking at it and I was like, what is this thing missing? And I realized that I had kind of forgotten about the like marks on a clock that show like the hours and the minutes on there. And I know not all clocks have that, but I felt like our sun was looking a little bit empty on the face. And so I have this little like collection of random items. I call them my little baubles. And so I've got like beads and sequins and buttons and like weird little puffy things that I keep. And, you know, anytime that I do a project that I have to get something like that, you know, I don't do stuff with pom-poms and sequins all that often, but I know that I'll probably have to use it again sometime, so I just keep it to the side. And I found these little like I guess crystal looking plastic things. I honestly don't know where they came from or what I used them for, but I found them and so I used them to decorate the edges of the sun face and it sort of marks where the hours are. And this was the point where it really like set in for me where I was like, I probably should have measured this because our sun is kind of like me going off of vibes as far as what time it is. It is definitely not a super accurate clock with the way that it lines up, but oh well. There's not much I can do about that now. I'd already hot glued it on before I even really like connected the dots on that one, but that's okay. It's fine. It's no big deal. And that was my clock. That's my clock. My favorite things about this clock, I love that the eyes move. That was kind of where the original intention came from. And I think it's really fun when sometimes the eyes are like lopsided at each other or like the face is skewed. And it just makes me really happy to look at it. I think that for something that was really only like kind of halfway planned out, it turned out really, really great. And like I said, it kind of inspired me to maybe look into some more clock-based art ideas. And I actually have another little clock mechanism set, so I can make at least one more clock, and then I'll have to figure out if I want to continue my journey. But it was a lot of fun. I think that everybody should make their own clock. Obviously, that's my takeaway from this is that it was very easy, and now I have a clock that I love, even if it's not a super effective clock. And I had a bunch of stuff that was sort of on its way to becoming trash in terms of the cardboard and all of the paint that I used was a lot of it was like pretty old. I don't really paint with acrylic paint very much, and so a lot of it was not really the kind of paint that I would want to use for like a more serious project. So I feel like I gave that some life. The little crystally things, like I said, those I don't know how long I've had them and how long they've just been sitting in my little closet box, but long enough that I forgot what I got them for originally. So it's really nice to have stuff that previously wasn't doing anything at all and now it gets to live on my wall and be a clock. So I'm really happy with that too. And that is all I have for show and tell today. I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope that you like my clock. And if you don't, that's okay. Maybe you can make a clock that you like more than mine. And I hope you're working on something that is making you happy. And I will see you next time. Bye.